Thanks, Cathaoirleach. It is worth noting at the outset that there is literally no opposition to this budget in the Dáil chamber today, as I look across at a phalanx of empty benches, and it is a point worth noticing. Cathaoirleach, this has been a good budget for family, for small and medium enterprises, for businesses generally, for schools, for students, for those who police our streets and who are responsible for that, for those who are involved or at the receiving end in terms of need in acute health care, for public transport users, for employees, for school children, and for the most vulnerable in our society, including those who are addicted and their families. But it also is a very prudent budget. For 6 years, Cathaoirleach, I've been on the Oireachtas Budgetary Oversight Committee and have, at every meeting with previous ministers for finance, raised the issue of corporation tax and the warnings by the Fiscal Advisory Council of our over-reliance on corporation tax and our vulnerability to corporation tax as a source of expenditure. This is the first government, in my experience, that has taken the advice and warnings of IFAC seriously and has put a significant sum and plans to put an even more significant sum away next year to protect and to ensure against any other shocks that the economy may experience. The background to this budget, and it is worth repeating, it's a point I made at committee and several times, is the weaponising of energy by Russia, resulting from its invasion of Ukraine. Much of the challenges that we are facing right now would not have arisen had energy supply and energy sources not been weaponised in such a way. And I also think it's important for the public that that connection continues to be made, because it's so easy to lose connection with the reality underpinning some of the incredible measures, particularly around energy, that have been required, including up to the commitment to businesses of particular sizes of €10,000 a month in terms of assisting them with their energy bills. I was out and about at a number of constituency engagements this morning, and constituents said, what do you think of the budget? And I said, look, it's not really important what I think, what did you think? And, you know, there was a broad welcome. That's the impression I'm getting. And having spoken to a number of businesses during the week and in the last few weeks, and spoken to them by phone, particularly in relation to the energy piece, I know that many of them will be breathing a very deep sigh of relief, not just today, but in terms of how they've been covered by this budget in the months ahead. Some of the family-friendly measures, I think, if I can start with them, that are worth mentioning, obviously in terms of childcare costs, that's the big one for young families. And then the allied, not just in terms of the cost of childcare and creche fees, and that's going to be improved again next year and built upon, but just things like the energy credits, the free primary school books, which have been mentioned as well, the reduction in university fees for some families, the retention of reduced public transport fares, the pension increases then for older families and older couples or singles. And there's also a key one which I had raised, and I'm going to take a little bit of responsibility for it unless someone says that I wasn't the only one to raise it. I raised it at budgetary oversight, but it was raised by a constituent of mine who said, you know, some businesses are doing extraordinarily well, and they are. And last year the government introduced the €500 tax-free gift that businesses could give to employees. The piece for the employer was they don't have to pay PRSI. And this employer was saying to me, look, if that could be raised to €1,000 this year, there are employers out there who would like to make that kind of gift to their employees. So I raised it with Michael McGrath, who passed it on to the Minister for Finance. And it is not only included in the budget, has it been increased to €1,000, it's been an employer can give that gift twice. So imagine a family, employees, receiving a gift certificate or money for all voucher on the 1st of December or mid-November. That is quite a substantial measure in this budget, which has kind of been overlooked in terms of the reportage of it. And I would encourage those employers who are doing very well out there to look on using this measure. In terms of student life, the budget has been, I think reasonably good for third level and fourth level students, but I do want to highlight the plight of PhD students. Research, and this government is more committed than any previous government in relation to higher education by dint of having the first cabinet minister with full responsibility for higher education. But we're not giving enough to PhD students to enable them to study, and without the resource of PhD students, the country will be the poorer in terms of opportunities and enterprise opportunities that may lie ahead. And I mentioned particularly educational psychologists and clinical psychologists. The health service is so short of clinical psychologists. They have made a particular point of seeking to raise the amount that they receive to €24,000 a year. And I would ask the Minister, not just to focus on clinical psychologists, but there are educational psychologists who play as important a function in our society also. But that PhD piece, I think we really need to look at that. Garda resourcing has come very much into focus in the last number of weeks, and I'm glad to see the recruitment figures for next year. But there is also attrition, pretty significant attrition rates in Garda numbers, and not due, as it would have been traditionally, just to retirements. Some Gardaí are leaving because they can't afford to live in Dublin, and others, the nature of the job has become so challenging that I think they have, and the lack of promotional opportunities, that they've decided to seek alternative employment, and that should be a cause of concern for the Minister from the Government. But I would like to see more resources allocated to new technologies. As you know, Cahirlock, a subject close to my heart and your heart was, and it's come through the Dáil now, it has to go to the Seanad, is the Transport Miscellaneous Bill, which includes the piece on scramblers. And technology will be needed to police scramblers, including drone technology. And I would like to see the Gardaí examine that, and the Minister have a conversation with the Gardaí about that. The building blocks piece is probably the piece that's come out of the budget. I understand and absolutely accept with apartments in my constituency that need remediation, and people expecting measures in this budget. And this is the measure that the Minister for Finance has decided is going to help pay for pyrite mica and defects generally. I have two issues with it. Obviously, it will affect every builder or contractor who buys concrete-related materials or concrete blocks. The problem is the people who will ultimately pay for that are a much narrower group of people who will more than likely be either first-time buyers or whatever. And if it could be, these measures have to be paid for. They are really significant. But if you look this year with the number of, if it was to be replicated next year, what I would say is social housing construction is outstripping private housing construction. So what you would have next year, if it was to be repeated, is that you would have the state paying itself through local authorities and approved housing bodies, because they're the ones who would be purchasing the materials or paying the contractors, the state paying itself. And that is not what we want. Ultimately, something dramatic is going to have to happen with the Construction Industry Federation in relation to facing up to the reality, particularly in relation to defective apartments and defective homes in Dublin. And I want to assure constituents of mine and people who have raised in the Building Defects Alliance that this is an issue that will not be let sit. Look, we talked about public transport fares. Reducing fares is great, but if you have no buses on routes, reduced fares are of little use to anyone. And I note the NTA's apology to commuters yesterday. That's about as useless as reduced fares when there are no buses on the routes. And when young students, and I particularly hone in on young female students, late in the evening are left stranded at buses and don't even know until the last minute, until that bus that's due disappears off the schedule. What did we do? It's my understanding, when free school transport was extended in the summer and when there wasn't enough buses, the department seemed to find buses from everywhere. And I would say to the NTA, you have your own public service obligation to commuters. Go out and find buses for these routes until such time as the contractor can supply buses to those routes. An apology simply isn't sufficient, and it flies in the face of government measures when the government has taken successive steps in relation to making use of public transport much more affordable and much more attractive, and the National Transportation Authority simply cannot provide buses on the routes to supply and meet the demand that is out there. Finally, and Minister Feehan is in front of me, there's a number of items there in the acute neurological health piece. Really welcome funding for an issue that's close to my heart, Huntington's disease. Minister Feehan knows I served for a number of years on Tallaght Drugs and Alcohol Task Force. There's 10.5 million for an additional 10.5 million for the drug strategy, another 4 million for the expansion of community and residential addiction services. That's so important. Almost $1 million for care pathways for high-risk drug and alcohol users, and one that I really welcome, 1 million for monitoring new and emerging drugs. So this is a budget that is very broad in its scope, very encompassing in terms of those who are signed up to the social contract in our society, and I think it has done its very best to meet the challenges that face this country heading into winter 2022 and spring 2023. Thanks, Gail.
Thank you, Deputy.